There's something I keep noticing when I rewatch the early seasons, how often characters talk about finding the right place. Not just any shelter, but the place where they can finally stop running. You hear it in their voices, see it in how they look at maps spread across hoods of cars. In Season 1, Rick leads everyone toward a CDC with that same hope. There has to be somewhere safe, he tells Lori. But here's what haunts me. Every single place they've found, every sanctuary, every walled community, every promise of safety has fallen or nearly destroyed them. The CDC self-destructed, the farm burned, the prison became a tomb. And I wonder if the search itself is the problem, or if maybe there's a pattern we can trace. What makes a place worth dying for, or worth dying in? Let's explore this together. Back in Season 1, Episode 6, TS-19, the group arrives at the CDC with genuine hope. It's one of the few times in the entire series where you can see real relief on their faces. Doctor. Jenner represents institutional authority, scientific knowledge, the promise that someone, somewhere, is working on fixing this. The building has power, running water, hot showers, wine with dinner. For one evening, they almost feel human again, but Jenner's promise is hollow. He's the last scientist left, and he's given up. The CDC isn't a sanctuary, it's a tomb with a countdown timer. When Jenner reveals that the building will self-destruct, that there's no cure, that he's kept them there to die with him in a painless way, it shatters something fundamental in Rick's worldview. Institutions aren't coming to save them. There are no adults in charge anymore. The government that Rick served as a sheriff's deputy is gone. This is the first pattern we see. Places that promise safety often hide something deadly beneath the surface. Jenner offers comfort, but plans their deaths. The illusion of sanctuary becomes a trap. And here's what I find interesting about Rick's response. He doesn't just reject Jenner's choice, he fights violently to escape, to save his people from this mercy. Because Rick fundamentally believes that survival, even painful survival, is better than comfortable death. That belief will define how he evaluates every location going forward. Is this place worth the cost? Can we defend it? Most importantly, are we free to leave if we need to? The CDC teaches Rick that institutional safety is an illusion. Buildings don't keep you safe, people do. Systems don't save you, choices do. And the promise of returning to the old world, to government protection and scientific solutions, is a lie that will get you killed if you believe it too long. But here's the deeper question that emerges from the CDC's fall. If false hope is dangerous, is any hope worth holding on to? Rick will struggle with this question for seasons. He'll build communities, establish safe zones, create systems of governance, but part of him will always remember Jenner's despair, the moment he learned that no place is truly safe, that every sanctuary is temporary. So when we talk about the best and worst places to survive, we have to start here, with the understanding that institutional promises are the most dangerous kind. The CDC looked perfect. It had everything, and it nearly killed them all. Is false hope better than no hope? That's the question Jenner's suicide forces Rick to answer. And his answer, that even desperate, painful hope is better than comfortable surrender, shapes everything that comes after. Season 2 brings the group to Herschel's farm, and it represents a completely different survival model: rural isolation. The farm has been relatively untouched by the outbreak because it's remote, because Herschel killed anyone who tried to approach, and because critically, he didn't understand what walkers really were. He thought they were sick people who could be cured, so he kept them in his barn. That delusion protected him initially because it meant he wasn't afraid, wasn't making desperate choices, wasn't attracting the kind of attention that brings danger. The farm teaches us about geography as destiny. Location matters. Being miles from population centers means fewer walkers, fewer desperate survivors passing through, fewer threats. The farm has a well for water, livestock for food, fields for planting. It's sustainable in ways that urban locations could never be. But isolation is also vulnerability. When the massive herd arrives in Season 2, Episode 13, Beside the Dying Fire, the farm can't withstand it. There are no walls, no defensible positions, no backup. The group scatters, believing people are dead who aren't, separated in the chaos. Rural isolation works until the moment it doesn't, and then it fails catastrophically. Now compare that to the prison in Seasons 3 and 4. The prison is Rick's attempt to have both the defensibility of walls and fences, plus the sustainability of fields and resources. When they first arrive and start clearing cell blocks, there's this sense of possibility. This could work. This could actually be home. And for a while, it is. They establish gardens, bring in survivors from Woodbury, create council governance. The prison represents Rick trying to build something permanent, something worth defending not just because it keeps them alive, but because it represents civilization rebuilding itself. But the pattern holds. The prison becomes a target. The governor attacks because it's valuable. The flu outbreak spreads because they're concentrated in enclosed spaces. And ultimately, in Season 4, Episode 8, Too Far Gone, the governor's final assault with a tank destroys everything they built. The prison, like the farm before it, becomes another lost home. Here's the observable pattern. Rural isolation, like the farm, offers sustainability, but not defense. Fortified positions like the prison offer defense, but attract threats. Neither solves the fundamental problem of the apocalypse that success makes you a target. Think about what Herschel represents at the farm. He believed in staying put, in maintaining the old ways, in the idea that if you just kept your land and protected your family, you could wait out the crisis. That worldview died when the barn burned, when he saw what walkers really were, when the herd forced them to flee. And think about what Rick tried to build at the prison. A community with rules, with farming and education and families. A place where Carl could grow up almost normal. That dream died when the governor's tank rolled through the fences. The emotional weight here isn't just about losing shelter. It's about losing the belief that you can build something permanent. The farm represented Herschel's old world values. His land, his rules, his family protected. The prison represented Rick's vision of rebuilding a community, working together. Sustainability plus security, both fell. So we have to ask, does location determine who lives and how they die? Or is it the choices people make about defending those locations? Because increasingly, it looks like the problem isn't the places themselves. It's that building something worth having makes you a target for people who'd rather take than build. Let me break down what actually makes a location survivable in the Walking Dead universe, because there are 3 critical factors that show up again and again across successful communities. First, water access. This isn't optional. It's the foundation everything else builds on. Humans can survive weeks without food, but only days without water. Every community that lasts more than a few months has reliable water access. Oceanside has the Atlantic coast. Hilltop has deep wells that we see people working throughout Seasons 6 through 9. Alexandria, established in Season 5, is built near a lake and has functional water infrastructure. You can see the pond in several episodes. and the houses have running water from that source. The kingdom, which Ezekiel leads in seasons 7 and 8, has gardens and water collection systems. Even the sanctuary under Negan's control must have had water infrastructure to support the population we saw there. You can't sustain hundreds of people without solving the water problem first. Second, defensibility. Walls matter. Fences matter. Natural barriers matter. The prison had multiple layers of fencing and walls. Alexandria has constructed walls around the entire community. The Commonwealth in Season 11 has massive walls and organized guard rotations. These aren't just psychological comfort, they're practical necessities. Walkers are persistent. A single weak point, a single breach, and the herd gets in. But here's what's interesting. Defensibility also makes you visible. High walls announce valuable things here. The saviors in seasons 7 and 8 specifically targeted walled communities because those communities had resources worth taking. The Whisperers in seasons 9 and 10 viewed walls as a challenge, a rejection of their philosophy that humanity should live among the dead. Third, resources and farmland. You need food production, not just scavenging. Hilltop excelled at this: rolling fields, organized agriculture, trade goods. The kingdom had gardens integrated into their community space, using Ezekiel's theatrical community spaces to also grow food. Alexandria had solar panels for power, which enabled food preservation and other survival advantages. But here's the pattern that emerges when you look at these factors together. The communities that survive combine at least two of the three. Oceanside has water and natural defense from isolation. Hilltop has water in farmland. Alexandria has all three, which is why it survived barely from season 5 through season 11. Yet even having all three advantages doesn't guarantee safety, because there's a fourth factor that the show demonstrates repeatedly. The safest places attract the most dangerous people. Think about it. The saviors didn't target struggling groups on the road. They targeted thriving communities with resources. Negan's entire system was built on extracting tribute from successful settlements. The Commonwealth's 50,000 person population means they needed massive resource extraction from surrounding areas. Success breeds predation. So we're left with this impossible calculation. You need water, defense, and resources to survive long term. But achieving those things makes you a target for anyone with enough violence to take what you've built. Rick learned this lesson across seasons. The prison had everything, and the governor destroyed it. Alexandria had everything, and the saviors showed up demanding half. The pattern is brutal and clear. Build something worth having, and someone will try to take it. But here's the alternative. Don't build anything. Stay mobile. Keep moving. And that means no agriculture, no security, no stability. It means children like Judith and RJ growing up without education, without community, without the chance to be anything other than survivors. Is there a middle ground? A survival sweet spot that's sustainable without being a target? That's what we need to figure out. Because the show has given us over a decade of data points, communities that worked and communities that fell. And somewhere in that pattern is an answer about what actually makes a place worth defending or worth leaving behind. Let's talk about the worst places to survive. And honestly, urban environments top that list. Season 1's Atlanta is our first brutal lesson in this. Rick wakes up in a hospital, walks outside, and finds a city overrun. Walkers everywhere. No escape routes. Population density that was Atlanta's strength before the outbreak becomes its deadliest weakness after. Cities mean more people, which means more walkers. The math is simple and horrifying. A city of 1 million people becomes a city of nearly 1 million walkers, all concentrated in a relatively small geographic area. Every apartment building, every office tower, every subway station is a potential death trap, and the density makes it nearly impossible to kill 100 walkers, and there are thousands more around the next corner. Morgan's experience in Season 3, Episode 12, Clear, shows us what urban isolation looks like. He's living alone in an apartment in King County, where Rick is from, and he's fortified his space with traps and weapons. But the psychological cost is devastating. Morgan has lost his mind to grief and isolation. He's covered the walls with writings about clearing, about the threat, about loss. He's alive, but he's not living. He's just existing in a cage of his own making, surrounded by dangers he can't eliminate. The Dead Cities spin-off set in Manhattan reinforces this pattern years later. Cities don't get better with time, they get worse. Buildings collapse, infrastructure fails completely. And any survivors left are desperate, dangerous, and competing for incredibly scarce resources in a vertical maze of the dead. Here's what makes cities especially deadly. You can't farm in a city. You can't establish sustainable food sources. You're entirely dependent on scavenging, and scavenging supplies run out. Water infrastructure requires power and maintenance that won't exist. Vertical living means walkers above and below you. Every floor is a risk. Morgan's apartment survival shows the endpoint of urban isolation: madness. Humans aren't meant to live alone, constantly vigilant, unable to trust. The city forces that isolation because you can't clear enough space to farm, can't secure enough area to be safe, can't trust that the strangers you encounter aren't desperate enough to kill you for your supplies. And there's no backup. In rural areas, you might encounter another survivor group. In cities, the density means you're surrounded by walkers, and the rare survivors are probably competing for the same scarce resources. Cooperation becomes harder when resources are that scarce. The Dead City setting drives this home years into the apocalypse. Manhattan hasn't improved. It's a vertical graveyard where survivors scavenge among ruins, where walkers can be above you or beside you or below you at any moment. The very architecture that made cities impressive before makes them death traps after. So here's the pattern. Urban environments fail on all three survival factors. No sustainable water infrastructure requires maintenance. No defensibility. Too much area to secure. Too many entry points. No resources. Can't farm. Scavenging depletes. The only advantage cities offer is initial scavenged supplies, and those run out fast when you can't grow more. Rick's instinct in Season 1 to leave Atlanta was absolutely correct. Morgan's eventual decision to leave his fortified apartment and find people was the only thing that saved his sanity. And the Dead City survivors we see are struggling years later with the same fundamental problems. Cities are traps that slowly destroy everyone who stays in them. If you're trying to survive the apocalypse, rule number 1 should be get out of cities. Get to rural areas where population density is lower, where farmland exists, where you might have a chance to build something sustainable. Cities promise supplies, but deliver death. But rural areas have their own deadly category: false sanctuaries. Places that promise safety, but hide something worse underneath. And Terminus in Seasons 4 and 5 is the perfect, horrifying example. The signs appear for miles: sanctuary for all, community for all. Those who arrive survive. It sounds perfect. It sounds like exactly what desperate survivors need to hear. The group is separated after the prison falls, and they're all following those signs, hoping to reunite at this promised sanctuary. In Season 5, Episode 1, No Sanctuary. We learn the truth. Terminus did start as a real sanctuary. Gareth and his people welcomed strangers, provided safety, tried to build community. But then raiders came, took over, brutalized the original Terminus residents. And when Gareth's people finally fought back and reclaimed Terminus, they'd been changed by the trauma. They decided never again would they be victims. Instead, they'd be predators. Terminus became a cannibal trap. The railroad cars where they imprisoned Rick's group, those were holding pens. The people who arrived did survive just long enough to be butchered for food. The promising signs weren't hope, they were bait. Here's what makes false sanctuaries so dangerous. They prey on the things survivors need most: hope. The belief that somewhere, someone is doing better, building something real. Terminus weaponized that hope and used it to lure people to their deaths. Season 5's Grady Memorial Hospital operates on similar principles, but with a different flavor of exploitation. Dawn and her officers maintain a working hospital, actual medical care, electricity, security. But the cost is forced labor. People they rescue are told they owe the hospital for the resources used to save them. Those debts are calculated to be unpayable, creating a permanent underclass of workers who can never leave. Beth's captivity there shows how false sanctuaries use the appearance of civilization to justify cruelty. Dawn genuinely believes she's maintaining order, preserving something valuable. But her system is built on exploitation and violence disguised as protection. The hospital isn't a sanctuary, it's a prison with better aesthetics. Then there's the sanctuary under Negan's control in Seasons 7 and 8. Same name as Terminus, but a different model. Negan doesn't hide what he is. He's explicit about the violence, the hierarchy, the cost of protection. The sanctuary has industry, food production, organization, but is built entirely on extracting resources from other communities through threat of violence. The pattern in false sanctuaries: they promise safety, but demand something unacceptable in return. Terminus demands your life. Grady demands your freedom. The sanctuary demands your submission and half your resources forever. Rick's trauma in Season 5, Episode 12. Remember, when he's taking that shower in Alexandria, he can't relax, even in hot water, even when safe. That's the cost of Terminus, of Grady, of learning that places offering safety might be planning your death instead. He's scanning for exits, for weapons, for the catch, because there's always a catch. The question that haunts survivors: how do you know when to stay versus when to run? Terminus looked legitimate until they were already in the train car. Grady seemed functional until they understood the system. Even Alexandria, which turned out to be genuinely trying to be good, felt suspect because Rick had learned not to trust promises of safety. Here's what I think. False sanctuaries are worse than obvious threats. A herd of walkers is straightforward danger. You see them, you avoid them, or fight them. But a place that looks safe, that sounds safe, that promises exactly what you desperately need, that's when your guard drops. That's when you make mistakes. And the show keeps proving this pattern. The places that promise the most: Terminus' sanctuary, Grady's hospital, even the Commonwealth's restored civilization, those places hide the darkest costs. Because in the apocalypse, if something seems too good to be true, it's because someone is paying a price you haven't seen yet. Now let's look at what I'd call mid-tier locations. Places that worked, but were constantly threatened. That survived, but at enormous cost. And Alexandria, Hilltop, and the Kingdom represent this tier perfectly. Alexandria, established in Season 5, is the longest surviving community we follow in the main show. From Season 5 through Season 11, it endures. But endure is the operative word. It's constantly on the edge of destruction. The wolves attack. The saviors take half their resources for seasons. The whisperers threaten it. The Commonwealth tries to absorb it. Alexandria survives, but barely, and only through constant vigilance and repeated near-death experiences. What Alexandria has going for it: walls, water infrastructure, solar panels, houses that were preserved from the early outbreak. The community was protected from day one, which meant supplies lasted longer, infrastructure stayed intact. But those same advantages made it a target. Hilltop, which we see from Season 6 through its fall in Season 9, has different strengths. Agriculture. Jesus describes it in Season 6, Episode 11, Knots Untie, as having fields, crops, livestock. They produce food, which makes them valuable to trade with and valuable to conquer. Gregory's weak leadership nearly destroys them before Maggie takes over, and even under better leadership, Hilltop falls to the Whisperer's herd attack. The kingdom in Seasons 7 and 8 is Ezekiel's theatrical attempt at rebuilding civilization. The community theater, the gardens, the whole performance of monarchy, it's Ezekiel trying to give people something to believe in, something bigger than mere survival. And for a while, it works. People have roles, meaning community, but the kingdom lacks strong defenses, and when infrastructure fails, pipes bursting, systems breaking down, it becomes unsustainable. By Season 9, the kingdom is abandoned. Here's the pattern these mid-tier places share. They had sustainability or security, but rarely both. And they all eventually fell or were absorbed into larger communities. Alexandria had security, but relied heavily on scavenging until Rick's group helped establish agriculture. Hilltop had agriculture, but weak defenses and weaker leadership initially. The kingdom had community and meaning, but insufficient infrastructure and defense. All three became targets for the saviors because they were thriving. Negan's system specifically identified successful communities and extracted resources from them. He didn't target struggling groups. He wanted established communities that produced enough to give half and still survive. Then the Whisperers represented a different threat, ideological. Alpha viewed walls and communities as weakness, as denial of the new world. Her use of walker herds as weapons specifically targeted walled communities. The Hilltop falls to a massive herd. Alexandria barely survives multiple herd attacks. There's something worth noticing in Rick's shower scene in Season 5, Episode 12, Remember, when they first arrive in Alexandria. He's overwhelmed by hot water, by the idea of safety, but he can't actually relax into it. His hand keeps moving toward where his weapon would be. His eyes scan the bathroom for exits. Even in the most safe moment he's experienced in years, he can't let his guard down. That's what living in mid-tier communities costs. You have walls and resources and some sense of stability, but you never stop being vigilant. You never stop planning escape routes. You never stop knowing that this could all end in an instant. The question becomes, would you trade freedom for walls? Would you commit to a location, invest in building it up, knowing that doing so makes you a target? Or would you stay mobile, stay hidden, stay small, and hope that being insignificant keeps you safe? Rick's group chose to commit, to build, to defend. And they survived, but the cost was constant warfare, constant loss, constant near destruction. The farm, the prison, Alexandria, every home required them to fight for it repeatedly. And here's what I keep thinking about. All three of these communities, Alexandria, Hilltop, Kingdom, eventually fall or get absorbed into the Commonwealth. The mid-tier model doesn't seem to be sustainable long-term. Either you stay small and hidden, or you grow large enough to be truly defensible. The middle ground just makes you a target, without giving you the resources to survive being one. Now I want to talk about what might be the most underrated survival location in the entire Walking Dead universe, Oceanside. Introduced in Season 7, Episode 6, Swear. Oceanside is a coastal community that survived hidden for years before Tara discovered them accidentally. Here's what makes Oceanside fascinating. It's predominantly women, after the Saviors killed all their men and boys over 10. That trauma shaped everything about how they built their community. They chose isolation over engagement. They chose to hide rather than fight. And critically, they chose obscurity over prominence. The coastal location gives Oceanside advantages no other community we've seen has. Direct access to the Atlantic Ocean means fish as a renewable protein source, salt for food preservation. Water, yes, you'd need to desalinate or collect rainwater for drinking, but being near water gives you options. The coast is also naturally isolated, no major roads leading directly there. Easy to see anyone approaching. Defensible in ways that inland communities aren't. But the real genius of Oceanside is that they actively avoided being known. When Tara discovers them in Season 7, they seriously consider killing her to preserve their secrecy. Because they understood something critical. In the apocalypse, being unknown is safer than being powerful. Think about the contrast with Alexandria or Hilltop. Those communities wanted to build, to grow, to be known as places of sanctuary. And that openness made them targets. The Saviors found them. The Whisperers found them. Every threat eventually found them because they were visible. Oceanside chose differently. No recruiting, no trade with outside groups, no signs pointing to their location. They sacrificed growth and connection for safety through obscurity. And it worked. They survived the Savior period without paying tribute, without losing half their resources, because Negan didn't know they existed. The pattern here: invisibility is a survival strategy. Being small, hidden, and seemingly insignificant means threats pass you by looking for bigger targets. Oceanside wasn't conquered because they weren't discovered. But invisibility has a cost too. Isolation means no backup when things go wrong. No trade network for resources they can't produce themselves. No allies if a threat does find them. Oceanside's obscurity protected them from the Saviors, but also meant they had no support system, no one to call on in crisis. There's a moment after Rick's group discovers Oceanside and eventually gets them to join the fight against the Saviors, where you can see this tension. The Oceanside women know that joining makes them visible, makes them targets. But isolation also means being alone if something goes wrong. They have to weigh, is the safety of obscurity worth the vulnerability of having no allies? I think Oceanside represents an undervalued model. Not cities, too dangerous. Not prominent walled communities, too visible. But small, hidden, coastal, or rural communities that prioritize sustainability and obscurity over growth and prominence. The problem is that this model doesn't scale. Oceanside works for maybe 100 people who can live off fishing and coastal resources. But you can't build a civilization this way. You can't preserve knowledge, culture, technology when every community is isolated and hidden. So Oceanside answers one question, how do you survive? But raises another, how do you rebuild? Because If everyone follows the oceanside model, humanity survives in scattered pockets but never recovers what was lost. There's a theory in the community that the best survival strategy is exactly what Oceanside did. Find a renewable resource coast, river with fish, good farmland, stay small, under 200 people, stay hidden. No signs, no recruiting, no trading with strangers, and defend fiercely if discovered. That model might let small groups survive for generations, but it also means giving up on rebuilding civilization, accepting that the old world is gone and won't come back, living in small tribes rather than building towards cities and nations again. The question becomes, what are you surviving for? Just to stay alive or to eventually rebuild? Oceanside chose survival over rebuilding. And there's nothing wrong with that choice. They're still there when other communities have fallen, but they're not growing, not advancing, not working toward anything beyond continued existence. Maybe that's enough. Maybe in the apocalypse, simply surviving another generation is success. Or maybe there's a middle path between Oceanside's isolation and Alexandria's visibility. A network of small communities that trade and support each other, but don't grow large enough to be valuable targets. That's the theory I'm building toward. But first, we need to understand why every place eventually falls. Here's the core theory I want to lay out. There's a survival sweet spot, and it's not what most communities have tried to achieve. The optimal survival location is medium-sized, hidden, near water, with agricultural capability, specifically avoiding both the extremes of isolated farms and major walled communities. Cities are death traps. We've established that. Too many walkers, no sustainability, psychological destruction through isolation. Atlanta, King County, Manhattan, they all demonstrate that urban environments are where you go to scavenge and leave, not where you stay. But isolated farms are almost as dangerous. Herschel's farm in Season 2 shows this perfectly. Sustainable, quiet, remote. But when the herd came, there was no defense, no backup, nowhere to retreat to. Rural isolation works until the moment of crisis, and then it fails catastrophically. The opposite, extreme major walled communities like Alexandria or the Commonwealth, offers security and resources, but becomes a massive target. The bigger you are, the more visible you are, the more attractive you are to anyone with enough force to take what you've built. So where's the sweet spot? I think it's the Oceanside model, adapted and improved. Here's what that looks like. A community of 100 to 200 people, small enough to sustain on local resources, but large enough to have specialization and defense. Located in a deliberately obscure location, not on major roads, not in obvious places, not anywhere that would attract random scavengers. Near water, critically important. Coast, major river, spring-fed lake. Water is the foundation. Without it, nothing else matters. With it, you have fishing, irrigation for crops, drinking water, and a natural barrier that makes approach visible. Agricultural capability is non-negotiable. You cannot survive long-term on scavenging. By season 11, 12 years into the outbreak, scavenge supplies are either depleted or degraded. Communities need to grow food, raise livestock if possible, have sustainable protein sources. But here's the critical part that most communities get wrong. You have to prioritize obscurity over growth. No recruitment. No signs. No trade with strangers. You grow only through natural population increase or carefully vetted refugees. The moment you become known, you become a target, Look at the evidence from the show. The communities that lasted longest were the ones that stayed hidden longest. Oceanside survived years under the Savior's noses because Negan didn't know they existed. The Kingdom and Hilltop got absorbed into Negan's system almost immediately because they were visible and known. Alexandria survived, but only through constant warfare and by essentially becoming powerful enough to defeat threats rather than avoid them. That's a sustainable strategy only if you're willing to maintain a permanent warrior class and constantly defend against new threats. The sweet spot is remaining invisible while building sustainability. Small enough that you're not worth the trouble of conquering. Hidden enough that most threats never find you. Sustainable enough that you can survive without scavenging, which means you don't need to send people into dangerous areas. This model sacrifices growth, prominence, and cultural preservation in favor of simple survival. You're not building a nation. You're maintaining a community that might last generations if you're careful and lucky. The cost is isolation. No allies when things go wrong. No trade network to provide resources you can't produce. No rescue if a threat does find you. You're entirely dependent on your own resources and capabilities. But the alternative, the Alexandria model of prominent communities that fight to defend what they build, requires constant warfare. Rick's group spent years fighting the Saviors, then the Whisperers, then dealing with Commonwealth politics. That's survivable if you have trained fighters and are willing to lose people in combat. But it's exhausting, traumatic, and ultimately unsustainable for most groups. So here's my theory. The communities that survive long-term will be small, hidden, near water, with agriculture and fishing. They'll avoid contact with strangers, maintain no visible infrastructure that would attract attention, and defend fiercely if discovered but primarily rely on never being discovered. This isn't how you rebuild civilization. This is how you survive while civilization is gone. It's accepting that the old world isn't coming back, that megacities and nations and global trade are finished. What remains is tribal survival, small groups living sustainably in hidden places. Is that depressing? Maybe. But it's also realistic based on what we've seen. Every attempt at building prominent communities has either failed or required constant warfare to maintain. The Oceanside model, obscurity, sustainability, fierce defense, only when necessary, seems to be the only strategy that allows communities to survive without constant conflict. The question is, would you accept that trade-off? Would you live small and hidden and isolated if it meant your children might grow up without war? Or would you rather build something visible and grand, knowing you'll have to fight to keep it? Now I need to address the pattern that haunts every community we've followed. No matter how good the location, no matter how strong the defense is, every place eventually falls. And I think the reason is both simple and devastating. Human threats outscale walker threats, and success attracts predators. The farm in Season 2 fell to a walker herd, yes, but that herd was drawn there by gunfire from Shane killing Randall. Human decisions created the crisis that walkers executed. The farm didn't fall to the dead, it fell because of conflicts among the living that attracted the dead. The prison fell in Season 4, Episode 8, Too Far Gone, not to walkers, but to the governor's assault. He came with a tank specifically because the prison was valuable, because Rick's group had built something worth taking. The prison's success, its fields, its security, its functioning community, is what made it a target. Alexandria's repeated near destructions in Seasons 5 through 11 all stem from human threats. The wolves attack because it's a functioning community. The Saviors extract tribute because it produces resources. The Whisperers target it ideologically. The Commonwealth tries to absorb it politically. The Walkers are background danger, but the real threats are always people. Here's the pattern. The Saviors didn't target struggling groups on the road. Negan built his entire system around identifying thriving communities and extracting from them. He needed communities that were successful enough to give up half their production and still survive. Failed communities had nothing to take. Successful communities were profit centers. Think about what Negan says in Season 7, defending his system. He views himself as providing a service protection in exchange for tribute. The communities he controls don't have to worry about other threats because he eliminates those threats to protect his resource base. It's brutal, exploitative, and psychologically terrorizing. But from his perspective, it's sustainable. He needs his tributaries to thrive so they can continue producing. The Whisperers in Seasons 9 and 10 represent a different threat model. Alpha doesn't want tribute. She wants submission to her philosophy. Walls are affronts to her belief that humans should live among the dead, that civilization is what destroyed humanity. She specifically targets walled communities not for their resources, but for what they represent: rejection of her worldview. Both threat models share something crucial. They target success. The Saviors target communities that have built something worth taking. The Whisperers target communities that have built walls, that have rejected the new natural order. Either way, building something valuable makes you visible to threats. There is a scene where Carol is leaving communities throughout the series after the prison falls. She leaves Alexandria multiple times. She eventually isolates herself. And while the show doesn't give her a speech explaining it, you can see the pattern. Carol knows that attachment to places leads to loss. She's learned that building something means eventually watching it burn. Her pattern of leaving communities when threatened isn't cowardice, it's adaptation to the reality that permanence is an illusion. The more you invest in a place, the more it costs when you inevitably have to leave. Rick's evolution shows a different response to the same pattern. In Season 5, Episode 10, Them, he says something like, "We are the walking dead." He's recognizing that the group itself is what matters, not the places they inhabit. They're alive because they stay together and move when necessary, not because they build permanent settlements. But then Rick spends the next several seasons trying to build permanent settlements anyway. Alexandria, the bridge project in Season 9, the inter-community alliances. He can't fully accept the nomadic model, even though he's articulated that it might be correct. The question the show keeps asking, is the search for home what keeps us human, or what kills us? Does the attempt to build permanent communities give life meaning, even if those communities eventually fall? Or is the constant cycle of building and losing what destroys people psychologically? I don't think the show gives a definitive answer. Rick's group survives specifically because they commit to places and defend them fiercely. But they also survive because they're willing to leave when necessary. The prison falls, and they move to Alexandria. Alexandria is threatened, and they consider leaving multiple times. The theory I'm building is that permanent settlement is a death sentence in the apocalypse. Not immediately, but eventually. Every place falls. The question is whether you can accept that impermanence and still build something worth living in while it lasts. Because here's the alternative: constant movement, no roots, no investment in places or people beyond your immediate group. That's survivable. Rick's group did it for months between the prison and Alexandria. but it's also corrosive. Children can't have educations. Skills can be developed. Culture can be preserved. You survive, but you stop being fully human. So maybe the answer is building knowing it's temporary. Investing in communities while maintaining the psychological flexibility to leave when necessary. That's incredibly hard to balance, but it might be the only sustainable approach to surviving when every success makes you a target. Let me talk about the Commonwealth, because it represents both the best and worst of what survival can look like in the Walking Dead universe. Season 11 shows us a community of 50,000 people, the largest functioning settlement we've seen. They have electricity, running water, organized government, social services, currency, jobs. From the outside, it looks like they've actually recreated civilization. But underneath that polished surface is a brutal class system. Pamela Milton and the administrative class live in luxury, clean clothes, abundant food, access to medical care, comfortable housing. The working class lives in overcrowded conditions, does the dangerous labor, and is denied basic services like medical care. Ezekiel's storyline illustrates this perfectly. He has a thyroid tumor, completely treatable with surgery. But he's assigned to waste management, a working-class job, so surgery isn't available to him. Not because the Commonwealth lacks surgeons or operating rooms. They have both. But because medical care is rationed based on class, and Ezekiel's class doesn't qualify for elective procedures. Watch him processing this. He's led communities before. He's the former king of the kingdom, a man who built something meaningful and good. And now he's being told he'll die from a treatable condition because he doesn't rate high enough in someone else's hierarchy. The injustice is staggering. This is what sustainability through scale looks like when it's built on inequality. The Commonwealth has resources to support 50,000 people, but those resources are distributed according to social value as determined by administrators. The people who maintain the system get treatment. The people who clean the waste don't. The Commonwealth has the best resources of any community we've seen. Sophisticated medical care, industrial capabilities, organized agriculture, defensive walls. But it has the worst humanity. It's preserved the old world's classism and inequality while discarding its ideals of equal rights and human dignity. Here's the theory question this raises. Is survival worth it if you've lost what makes survival valuable? The Commonwealth's residents have safety, food, shelter, but they also have exploitation, inequality, denial of basic human rights to anyone in the wrong class. Is that a life worth living, or just another kind of death? Rick's declaration in Season 5 that we are the walking dead feels relevant here. The Commonwealth's working class aren't fully alive. They're going through motions, surviving but not thriving, existing in a system that uses them without valuing them. They're walking dead who happen to still be breathing. Alternative reading. Maybe size requires inequality. Maybe you can't organize 50,000 people without hierarchy, without some people having more than others. Maybe the Commonwealth's model, as ugly as it is the only way to maintain civilization at scale. Small communities like Oceanside can be egalitarian because everyone knows everyone. But at 50,000 people, you need administrators, organization, hierarchy, and hierarchy creates inequality. Negan's saviors operated on similar logic. He justified brutal violence and exploitation as necessary to maintain order, to keep communities producing. The strong rule, the weak serve, and everyone survives because the system works. It's monstrous, but from a purely functional standpoint, it sustained multiple communities for years. The question becomes, would you live under tyranny for safety? Would you accept being in the Commonwealth's working class, knowing you'll probably die from treatable conditions if it meant your children had food and walls and some chance of growing up? I think different people answer that differently. Some of Rick's group integrates into the Commonwealth despite its flaws, because it offers stability their children have never known. Others, like Daryl, can't accept it because freedom matters more than safety. The pattern I'm seeing: you can have small communities with equality and freedom, but limited security. Oceanside, early Alexandria. Or you can have large communities with security and resources, but significant inequality and exploitation. Commonwealth, saviors. The middle ground, medium-sized communities with both equality and security seems unsustainable. They either fall to larger predatory communities or grow into hierarchical systems themselves. This creates an impossible choice for survivors: accept inequality for the sake of scale and security, or maintain freedom and equality at a cost of remaining small and vulnerable. The Commonwealth represents the endpoint of choosing scale. They've preserved civilization's infrastructure, but also its worst social tendencies. The question is whether that's inevitable, whether recreating civilization means inevitably recreating its injustices, or whether it's a failure of leadership, a choice to build hierarchy when equality was possible. I don't think the show answers this definitively, but I noticed that the communities our protagonists build, Alexandria under Rick, Hilltop under Maggie, try to maintain equality even as they grow. They have leaders, yes, but those leaders don't live dramatically better than everyone else. Resources are shared. Medical care is provided based on need, not class. The Commonwealth proves that large-scale survival is possible, but it also proves that scale comes with costs. The question is whether those costs are necessary, or whether they're choices that could have been made differently. And here's what haunts me. If the Commonwealth is the future, if 50,000-person communities built on class inequality are what replaces the old world, then what exactly have we survived for? Is that a future worth building, or just another kind of apocalypse? Looking at character arcs through the lens of location reveals something profound. People are defined by their relationship to home, to settlement, to the question of whether permanence is possible or desirable in the apocalypse. Rick's journey is the journey from believing in institutions to building his own. Season 1 CDC represents his faith that government, science, authority will save everyone. When that fails, he moves through farms and prisons, trying to build communities that preserve old-world values. By Alexandria in Season 5, he's learned to build while maintaining suspicion, to commit while staying ready to leave. His final arc in Season 9, building the bridge to connect communities, sacrificing himself to save everyone, represents full commitment to the idea that permanent civilization is possible and worth dying for. But notice, Rick's belief in permanence costs him everything. His commitment to building gets Lori killed, Carl killed, almost destroys Alexandria multiple times. The bridge that represents the future explodes with him on it. His faith that you can build something permanent and defend it is both his greatest strength and what ultimately takes him from his family. Daryl represents the opposite philosophy. He's never comfortable in settlements. Even in Alexandria, he keeps to himself, stays ready to leave, maintains his nomadic skills. After Rick disappears in Season 9, Daryl isolates himself by a river, living alone, searching. He helps communities, but doesn't join them fully. For Daryl, home isn't a place, it's people. And when those people are gone, he doesn't need walls or buildings. He needs wilderness and solitude. The show presents Daryl's approach as damage, as inability to connect. But maybe it's adaptation to reality. Maybe understanding that places are temporary, that walls fall, that the only thing that lasts is your own survival skills. Maybe that's the healthiest response to the apocalypse. Carol's pattern is even more interesting. She transforms with each location. Abused housewife at the Atlanta quarry, protective mother at the farm, emerging warrior at the prison, ruthless survivor on the road, domestic performance in early Alexandria, isolated recluse seeking peace, vengeful warrior against the whispers. Each location change coincides with a personality transformation. It's like she becomes whoever she needs to be for that environment, never fully settling into any identity because no place lasts long enough to make permanence possible. And maybe that's the cost of surviving multiple fallen communities. You stop building stable identities because your environment keeps changing. You become fluid, adaptive, but also somewhat disconnected from any core self. Maggie shows us leadership's burden. She becomes Hilltop's leader in Season 6 and immediately inherits all the responsibility of making a place work. Every decision about resources, security, diplomacy is hers. And when Hilltop falls to the Whisperers, she carries that failure. Her entire identity becomes tied to placemaking, to community building. When she returns in Season 10 and eventually Season 11, she's different, harder, less trusting, more willing to make brutal calls. Leading a community changed her, and losing it damaged her. The pattern across characters, relationship to location, reveals relationship to hope. Rick's commitment to building shows desperate hope that permanence is possible. Daryl's resistance to settling shows acceptance that it's not. Carol's transformations show adaptation to impermanence. Maggie's leadership burden shows the cost of trying to make places last. My prediction for future character arcs: the next generation Judith, RJ, Herschel Jr., the children growing up in this world, they won't have Rick's nostalgia for the old world. They won't remember pre-apocalypse stability. For them, nomadic survival or small hidden communities will be normal. They won't spend years trying to rebuild cities and nations because they never saw those things work. And that might actually make them better survivors. Unburdened by memories of how things used to be, they can build societies that actually fit the new world rather than trying to recreate the old one. The Daryl Dixon spin-off in France and Dead City with Maggie and Negan both suggest this evolution. Diaspora becomes the new normal. Communities scatter. People move. The idea of permanent settlement gets replaced by networks of temporary safe havens, way stations, seasonal locations. That's not failure, that's adaptation. Accepting that the world has fundamentally changed and survivors need to change with it. Here's what I keep thinking about. Every character who fully committed to a place, Rick, Herschel, Glenn, Carl, either died defending it or was destroyed by its loss. The characters who survived, Daryl, Carol, Michonne, are the ones who learned to hold places loosely, to build without becoming dependent on any location lasting. The lesson seems to be, love people, not places. Invest in relationships, not buildings. Build communities while maintaining the psychological flexibility to leave when you must. That's emotionally devastating. It means accepting that nowhere is home, that permanence is impossible, that everything you build will eventually fall. But it might also be the only sustainable approach to maintaining humanity in a world where walkers and human threats ensure that no sanctuary lasts forever. The characters who learned this survived. The ones who couldn't accept it died, defending illusions of permanence. And that's the tragedy. The hope that makes you fight to build something is also what makes you unable to leave when you should. There's a moral question running underneath all of this that we need to address directly. What would you sacrifice for your community's safety? And the show gives us multiple answers, none of them comfortable. The Commonwealth's model: sacrifice equality for security, accept class hierarchy, exploitation, denial of medical care to the unworthy, all to maintain civilization at scale. Pamela Milton genuinely believes she is preserving something valuable. The Commonwealth works. It houses 50,000 people. It produces food, maintains infrastructure, provides security. The cost is that some people matter more than others, that working-class residents die of treatable conditions while the elite thrive. Is that justified? Some would argue, yes, better to have 50,000 people surviving under an unjust system than 50,000 people dead because the system collapsed, trying to maintain impossible equality. Inequality is ugly, but it's better than everyone starving equally. Others would say that survival under exploitation isn't worth it. That Rick's group didn't fight through years of horror just to recreate the old world's injustices. That if the only way to survive at scale is through hierarchy and suffering, then small egalitarian communities are morally superior, even if less secure. Terminus and Grady Memorial represent the extreme end of this calculation. Gareth's people at Terminus started with good intentions: welcome everyone, help everyone, build a real sanctuary. Then they were brutalized by raiders, victimized by the very openness they offered. When they fought back and reclaimed Terminus, they'd been changed. They decided, never again will we be victims. Instead, they'd prey on others. The cannibalism is indefensible, obviously. But Gareth's logic that it's us or them, that mercy is weakness, that you must be predator or prey, that logic is what survival pushed them toward. The show doesn't excuse it, but it explains how ordinary people become monsters when trauma and scarcity destroy their humanity. Grady Memorial's Dawn uses similar justification. The forced labor system is exploitation, but from her perspective, it's necessary to maintain the hospital's functioning. Rescued people owe debts for the resources used to save them. It's practical, organized, sustainable. The fact that debts are calculated to be unpayable, that people become permanent servants, that violence enforces the system. Dawn frames those as unfortunate necessities rather than cruelty. Negan explicitly defends his system as protection. The communities under Savior control don't have to worry about other threats because he eliminates those threats. He's providing security in exchange for resources. Yes, his methods are brutal, terrorizing, deliberately cruel. But from his perspective, cruelty is efficiency. Public violence against some prevents the need for violence against all. Killing Abraham and Glenn wasn't murder, it was establishing order, making an example, ensuring compliance without ongoing conflict. He's wrong, morally. The show makes that clear. But his argument that harsh systems can be sustainable systems isn't entirely without merit. The Saviors maintained multiple communities for years through fear and tribute. Ugly, unjust, built on terror, but functional. Rick's evolution shows him grappling with this question across seasons. Early, Rick believed in law, in civilization, in doing things the right way. By season 5, he's ready to kill Pete without a trial because Pete is dangerous and unstable. By season 7, he submitted to Negan temporarily because resistance would get more people killed. By season 9, he's executing prisoners to prevent war, making brutal calls to preserve inter-community peace. Watch Rick's face in season 5, episode 10, Them, when he says, "We are the walking dead." He's accepting that they've become something different, that old moral standards don't apply, that survival requires becoming harder, colder, more willing to do whatever's necessary. But Rick never fully accepts the Negan model. He keeps trying to build communities that are both safe and just, that protect people without exploiting them. It costs him everything: his wife, his son, eventually his life, or at least his ability to be with his family. But he keeps trying because he can't accept that survival requires becoming monstrous. Alternative reading. Maybe some of the villains were right. Maybe Negan's harsh triage, the Commonwealth's hierarchies, even Terminus's extreme pragmatism about protein sources, maybe those were adaptations to reality that heroes couldn't accept because they were still clinging to old-world morality. I don't believe that. I think the show demonstrates repeatedly that brutal systems are unsustainable because they create resistance, because they destroy the humanity that makes survival meaningful. But I acknowledge the argument exists, that survival at scale requires hard choices that look like cruelty from the outside. The question for viewers: what would you sacrifice? Would you live in the Commonwealth's worker class, dying of treatable conditions, if it meant your children had food and walls? Would you pay tribute to the saviors, if it meant your community avoided direct warfare? Would you become what Terminus became if that was the only way your people survived? There's no comfortable answer. The show presents us with scenarios where every choice is compromise, where maintaining humanity costs survival and ensuring survival costs humanity. Rick's final arc, building the bridge that connects communities, sacrificing himself to save everyone, represents his answer. That building something good is worth dying for, even if that thing eventually falls. That the attempt to maintain humanity and community and justice is worthwhile, even when it's costly and temporary, and maybe futile. But Daryl surviving by staying outside communities, Carol surviving by being willing to leave, Michonne surviving by balancing commitment with readiness, those represent different answers, equally valid, equally human. The moral cost of safe places is whatever you had to become to make them safe. And that cost is different for everyone, calculated in lost innocence, compromised values, or the decision that no place is worth more than your freedom or your humanity. So here we are, back where we started. Maps marked with destinations that no longer exist. The CDC, destroyed. The farm, overrun. The prison, fallen. Terminus, burned. Even Alexandria, still standing in season 11, is scarred by years of near destruction and constant warfare. Every place marked on those early maps has either fallen or fundamentally changed. And here's what I've come to understand. The theory isn't about finding the perfect location. There is no perfect location. Every place we've examined has fatal flaws. Cities kill through walker density and resource scarcity. Isolated farms fail when threats arrive. Walled communities become targets. Even the Commonwealth, with all its resources and 50,000 residents, is built on foundations of inequality that make it morally uninhabitable for many. The theory is about accepting impermanence, understanding that no place is forever, that every sanctuary is temporary, that the search for permanent home might be what destroys people's ability to survive. Rick spent years searching for and building safe places. Each one fell or nearly destroyed him. The CDC almost killed his family. The farm burned. The prison cost him Lori and eventually had to be abandoned. Alexandria required constant warfare to maintain. The bridge project, his final attempt to literally connect communities into lasting civilization, exploded with him on it. His search for permanence was both his defining virtue and his tragic flaw. He believed so deeply that permanent civilization was possible that he kept building, even as every community he built eventually fell. That belief gave meaning to his survival, gave his people something to fight for. But it also prevented him from accepting the new world's fundamental truth. Nothing built lasts. Daryl, Carol, Michonne, the long-term survivors, all learned to hold places loosely, to build while staying ready to leave, to invest in communities without becoming dependent on any location lasting forever. That psychological flexibility is what allowed them to survive multiple fallen communities without being destroyed by the losses. The best place to survive isn't a location, it's a mindset. The understanding that you build for now, not forever. That walls will fall, that communities will scatter, that everything material is temporary. But relationships, skills, adaptability, the decision to keep choosing life, those can persist even as locations change. And maybe that's not depressing. Maybe it's freeing. If you accept that no place is permanent, you stop investing so much emotional weight in locations. You build because building gives life meaning, but you're not devastated when you eventually have to leave because you knew from the beginning it was temporary. The worst places are the ones that promise permanence. Terminus's sanctuary for all, the Commonwealth's restored civilization, even the CDC's scientific authority. Those promises of lasting safety are what make people drop their guard, invest fully, become dependent, and then are destroyed when the illusion shatters. The future I see in the spin-offs supports this theory. Daryl in France, Maggie and Negan in Manhattan. The diaspora model where survivors scatter rather than concentrate. Small groups moving through landscapes, building temporary camps, staying flexible and mobile. It's not civilization in the old sense, but it might be the only sustainable model for human survival when walkers and human threats ensure that no permanent sanctuary exists. There's a theory in the fan community that the real Walking Dead aren't the walkers. They're the survivors who keep walking, keep moving, never settling, always one step ahead of death. And maybe that's the answer to our original question. The best place to survive is the place you're with people you love, for as long as that lasts, knowing you'll have to leave eventually. The worst place is anywhere you believe you can stop, that you can finally be safe, that permanence is possible. Because that belief makes you vulnerable, makes you unable to leave when you should, makes you invest so much that loss destroys you. Rick's maps with their crossed-out destinations weren't failure, they were learning. Each fallen community taught them something about what doesn't work, about what to avoid, about how to survive the next one better. The farm taught them about the need for defenses. The prison taught them about the danger of visibility. Alexandria taught them about the cost of commitment. And collectively, those lessons suggest a model. Small, hidden, near water, with agriculture. Prepared to defend fiercely if discovered. Equally prepared to abandon and rebuild elsewhere if a threat arrives that can't be beaten. Communities built with the understanding that they're temporary, that the people matter more than the place, that home is whoever's still walking beside you rather than whatever walls you've built. Is the search for home what keeps us human or what kills us? Both, maybe. The search gives life meaning, gives people something to build toward, something to hope for. But the attachment to places, the belief that this time will be different, that this community will last, that's what makes people unable to leave when they should, what makes them defend the indefensible, what destroys them when inevitable loss comes. So the theory concludes, there's no best place to survive. There are only better and worse strategies for moving through places. Better. Build with the knowledge it's temporary. Commit while staying ready to leave. Invest in people rather than locations. Maintain skills and adaptability. Worse. Believe in permanence. Depend on walls. Stop planning escape routes. Think you've finally found the place you can stop. The walkers keep walking. The survivors who survive keep walking too. Not because they want to, but because stopping, really believing you've found permanent safety is when you die. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the future isn't about rebuilding old world civilization with its cities and nations and permanence. Maybe it's about accepting that humanity will survive in smaller, more mobile, more adaptive forms. Tribes rather than cities. Networks rather than nations. Temporary camps rather than permanent settlements. That future is already visible in the spin-offs, in the way communities have scattered and reformed and scattered again. It's not what Rick died trying to build, but it might be what actually survives. The compass without a needle from the opening? It's broken, but kept. Not because it works, but because it reminds us that we're always moving, always searching, even if there's no fixed destination. The movement itself is what keeps us alive. The search itself is what keeps us human. Maybe home was never a location. Maybe home is just whoever's still walking beside you for as long as you walk together. And when the walking ends, you mark another destination on the map and you keep moving. The places don't matter, the people do. And that might be the only truth that survives every fallen sanctuary. Somewhere in Virginia, there's an abandoned map fluttering on Alexandria's fence. The paper is faded now, water damaged, torn at the edges. You can still make out some of the marked locations if you look carefully. The CDC crossed out. The farm crossed out. Places that once meant hope, now just markers of what's been lost. But there are new markings too. Penciled additions from survivors who came after, who found the map and added their own destinations. Small communities, safe houses, water sources, agricultural areas. The map keeps growing even as locations keep failing. And beside the map, half buried in overgrown grass, there's a compass. The needle is stuck, pointing nowhere useful, but someone's kept it anyway. Maybe because it reminds them that you don't need to know exactly where you're going to keep moving forward. Maybe because even broken instruments carried meaning about the journey itself. This is what remains after all those fallen communities. The understanding that you keep moving, keep building, keep searching, not because you'll find the perfect place you won't, but because the search itself, the building itself, the community that forms during the journey, maybe that's what home was all along. The places we talked about tonight, the CDC, the farm, the prison, Terminus, Alexandria, the Commonwealth, they all taught their lessons through failure, through falling, through demonstrating that every sanctuary is temporary, that every wall eventually fails, that permanence is an illusion that gets people killed when they believe it too strongly. But those failures weren't meaningless. Each one shaped survivors, taught them something, prepared them for what comes next. The communities that fell left behind knowledge, relationships, skills. They left behind children who grew up learning different lessons than their parents, adapting to a world their parents couldn't fully accept was real. Maybe the right place was never a location. Maybe it was always just a moment, a season, a temporary gathering of people trying to survive together before circumstances forced them to scatter and reform elsewhere. Like a compass without a needle, still carried forward, not because it guides, but because it reminds us that we're always in motion, always searching, always becoming something new. The search continues. The walking continues. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough.